A major source of objection to a free economy is precisely that. Gives people what they want instead of what a particular group thinks they ought to want. Underlying most arguments against the free market is a lack of belief in freedom itself. Milton Friedman. All right. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I want to especially thank you if you are tuning in live because I know it is early, but we are going to kickstart this morning, talk about some interesting things here today. I've actually got two things to talk about. One's a bill review and one's something that I saw on the internet that kind of got libertarians a little riled up. So we're going to address that, get some things going here. There we go. My little logo up there on the screen for myself. All right. So what do we got going on? Well, Tucker Carlson is at it again, but this time kind of got some of us libertarians riled up from this clip with Tucker on. He was on Glenn Greenwald's show. I believe it's, I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but we'll see it in just a second here. So I actually have two clips to play. The one that's going around, it's about a 4-minute clip. So I'll play that and I'll stop periodically to interject into, some of my commentary on that particular clip. And then we're going to play something very interesting. And I think there's something insightful to be learned here. And we don't actually have to be angry at Tucker Carlson, believe it or not. So let's go ahead and get right into that clip right away. Let's just dive right on in. So let's see what we got here. Let's do this.
But it also kind of transformed economic policy. He frequently kind of denounced the classic sort of Reaganomics, this idea that, we should all cheer for the richest people in our society to get richer because a rising tide lifts all boats. And everybody watches Raytheon and Boeing and BlackRock and Amazon get richer and richer and richer, and their boats aren't rising. And it really led a lot of people who have been capitalists their whole lives to at least start questioning not capitalism as a theory, but capitalism, how it manifests in American society. What is your view about sort of where the populist right is, the Trump movement is, when it comes to these core questions of economic theory and economic populism?
I think a lot of people have awakened to the now demonstrable fact that libertarian economics was a scam perpetrated by the beneficiaries of the economic system that they were.
Okay, so we're going to stop right here because, look, fellow libertarians, I know how this works. The moment somebody says the word libertarian, our ears perk up. And the first thing that we're looking for is, are they getting it all right? And the answer is usually no. Okay. And that's okay. right? Like it's okay and it's not. It's not okay in the sense that no, we want people to understand our views, right? So it's not okay in that sense, but it's okay because people don't understand our views. So our job is not to worry about everybody that out there that's getting it all wrong. Our job is to get out there and to help teach people what it is. Okay. So when your ears perk up and you hear him say libertarian economics. So first of all, I was like, what? I didn't even know what libertarian economics was, right? Like I don't know what that phrase means. Okay. Now, what's not in this clip at the very, like right before this clip starts, Greenwall, Glenn is talking about Donald Trump and some of the changes that occurred, like some of the things that we saw with the rise of Trump. Okay, so he's really talking about how Trump has influenced politics and abroad and politics here domestically and economics, and so he's kind of talking about the bull in the china shop that was Trump with our political system. That's what he's talking about. He's not talking about any like and look, we know, and I don't like saying that people are not libertarian, but we know that Trump is not a libertarian. We know that because of the policies that he supports, the things that he says, the fact that he's, the fact that he's a Republican is the least of the reasons why he's not a libertarian. It's about the things that he says and about the things that he believes and the things that he wants to push. It's about those. The fact that he's never claimed to be a libertarian. I mean, he might have said the word once or twice at best. Okay. So I don't like saying that somebody's not a libertarian, but by any reasonable measure, Trump is not a libertarian. So anything that has come about in the United States as a result of him running as president and being in the political fray is not libertarian economics. All right, so let's continue. So now we're okay. We're like it's okay. They said libertarian economics. It's not really a thing. There's no such thing as libertarian economics. Like there are libertarians who have economic views, Austrian economics, but there's no libertarian economics in reality. But we're okay with that. So we're going to move on.
We're defending. So they created this whole intellectual framework to justify the private equity culture that's hollowed out the country. That's my personal view, and I've seen it.
Okay, so he's like they created this framework to justify this private equity. That again, what he's describing is not what libertarians would recognize as quote unquote libertarian economics, or as we would call it, Austrian economics. Okay, so again, he's just using poor wording for whatever reason.
Up close my whole life, so I think it's a fair assessment. I think a smarter way to assess an economic system is by its results. So you can assign whatever name you want to the economic system of the United States. You could call it market capitalism. You could call it, you could call it a whole host of different things. But I don't think any of that's useful. Those are boring conversations.
Yes and no, they're boring conversations. They're boring conversations generally in the way that we talk about them, right? We talk about things and we get very academic. No, it's this word, it's that word. And then we want to launch into like these deep conversations rather than make it relatively simple. And I'm going to talk more on that here in just a moment. But I think he's kind of right that it is a boring conversation, but it's boring in the way that we present it. It doesn't have to be boring, but that's the big challenge. So let's continue.
I think you need to ask, does this economic system produce a lot of dollar stores? And if it does, it's not a system that you want because it degrades people and it makes their lives worse and it increases exponentially the amount of ugliness in your society. And anything that increases ugliness is evil. And it's just kind of
okay. So that I'm still kind of digesting this, like what to make of this notion of like dollar stores. And I know he's going to mention in a moment about this is really it's somewhere between a metaphor and a reality. And he's kind of using this as a measure. It's almost similar to saying like, hey, how bad is a storm? And then everybody goes and they looks at the Waffle House as Waffle House closed, right? And that's kind of like our benchmark for whether or not a storm is really, really bad. And it sounds like that's what he's kind of using here, like this idea of a dollar store. But I think it's actually more than that. So maybe he's distilling it down to something more simple. But again, that's kind of the point. That's how you make these conversations more palatable so that people will want to listen. Like he's not talking about he's not describing economic theories and in getting into the weeds of something of things, using jargon that people have never heard. He's like, look, is there a dollar store in your neighborhood? Yeah. Well, it's probably that is something that makes things look ugly, and ugly things are bad, right? Like that's basically what he's doing. Like anybody listening to this could understand what he's saying, whether they agree or not. They can understand it because it's not boring. It's simple. All right, let's continue.
Just start there. So if it's such a good system, why do we have all these dollar stores? Dollar store is the clear. I mean, it's not the only ugly thing being created in the United States, but it's one of the most common, and it's certainly the most obvious. So if you have a dollar store, you're degraded. And any town that has a dollar store does not get better; it gets worse. And the people who live there lead lives that are worse. So, and the counter argument, to the extent there is one, oh, they buy cheaper stuff. Great, but they become more unhappy. And the dollar store itself is a sort of symbol. What's a physical thing? It's a real thing. It's not just a metaphor, but it's also a metaphor for your total lack of control over where you live and over the imposition of aggressively in your face, ugly structures that send one message to you, which is you mean nothing. You are a consumer, not a human being or a citizen. And
so I actually don't really disagree. I just don't know that I follow along or I'm necessarily agreeing with the entirety of what he's saying. I think that we can look and say, like, what do these things say about us? Now, it's kind of like this old argument of Walmart. When Walmart's moved to town, all the mom and pop shops got booted out basically, and we basically just became consumers. Now, where I disagree with him slightly is that we played a role in this, right? Like we did play a role in bringing the Walmarts and the dollar stores and all these cheap things and all these ugly structures. And none of these criticisms are new. Like people have criticized, people have for years said places like dollar stores and Walmarts, they make, they end up with, they lead to a, a less pleasant, um, community, right? Like and their structures are bland and boring, and there's nothing exciting about them. But again, we played a role in this, and so it sounds to me, and I can't interview um, Tucker Carlson here, and I can't ask him, questions about this, but it sounds to me like he is looking out for other people without adding their input, without saying what is it, what role have you played? He's just like, hey, look, we've got this system, and the system has kind of imposed upon you. But I don't think it's the system entirely. Like we've played a role in it, right? And this is and again, these are not new criticisms. So let's continue on.
so again, I don't know what we call our current system, but its effects are grotesque.
Okay, I'm gonna stop one more time. So this is where I really perk up because he's like, I don't know what we call our system. I do actually. What we call it is crony capitalism. And this is where Glenn Greenwald a moment ago was like, hey, there's this idea that the rising tide raises all boats, but it kind of doesn't, and that's because we have crony capitalism. We don't have capitalism by itself as understood by, say, libertarians. We don't have a free market, again, as understood by libertarians. So therefore, since we don't have either one of those two things as we understand it, I would object to the idea that there has ever been such a thing, or maybe not ever, but there is at any time in recent history that there has been something that might be called libertarian economics. But it is what we call this is crony capitalism. And this crony capitalism has to do with our political system. And I think that is the biggest thing that libertarians can really dig into. Okay, so we got a couple more minutes out of this clip, and then we will go into what I think is the more insightful part, which actually is shortly after this clip. So let's continue on.
They're grotesque. It's wrecked. I've been here 54 years and I watch carefully. That's my only gift, is I watch. And this has become a much uglier place, a much more crowded place, a much more hostile place, a place that cares much less about people. So whatever system that produces that outcome is a bad system. And you can call me whatever you want. Oh, you're a socialist. I don't care what you call me, actually. I'm beyond caring about name calling. It's bad, and I oppose it.
Yeah, believe me, I know. I got in a lot of trouble once for suggesting that you and Steve Bannon are a lot more socialist in a certain limited sense than a lot of people who claim that title. And of course, the nuance of that point got completely lost. But I do think the fact that you are focused so much on kind of the welfare of ordinary people, and you go to anywhere in the world, you go to Western Europe and you see these structures that people spent 200 years building just for the sheer beauty of it. And you go into nature and you see beauty like it never exists. And you go to developing countries and you see a kind of dedication to buildings even that are designed to be inspiring and to kind of stimulate things in the human soul. And then you go to the places in the United States where our infrastructure is falling apart, where our new structures are designed to be as ugly as possible. And it's a very difficult thing to do, to communicate these sort of spiritual components of our politics, but ultimately politics does have no purpose other than to elevate the happiness of our citizenry. And by every metric, the happiness of our citizenry is declining. Suicide, addiction, use of antidepressants, all of that.
Okay, so what they're talking about here, just so that we can get a good sense, is they're looking out across the landscape and they're saying, what do we have? What are the results of the system that we've had? Again, regardless of what we call it, what are the results? And at the end of the day, they're highlighting two major things. They're looking and saying, one, the structures that we build, they fall apart. They look ugly. They're not inspiring. And then on top of that, or side by side, the people are unhappy. We're on medications. We're fighting over pronouns. I mean, they're not saying these things in particular, but I would assume that they would agree that these are the kind of results that we're getting from the system that we have. And again, the system is a very crony capitalist system. So let's define a couple terms as I understand it. And I'm not an economist, but I'm simply going to make very simple definitions that I think are appropriate. So when I say capitalism, I just simply mean who owns things, right? Who owns businesses? And it's not society, it's not the government, it's individuals. My wife owns her own business. She's in real estate and she has her own business. Other people have businesses. Maybe they own a shoe shop, or maybe they own, whatever. But the fact that regular everyday people can own a business, whatever that business is, big or small, that is capitalism. Who owns it? The ownership. It's invested privately in individuals. And then when I talk about the free market, I think of a free market as one where the government is not interfering with the transactions between customers and businesses and businesses and businesses and so on and so forth. So from my perspective, we still have a relatively capitalist society by that very simple definition, but we definitely don't have a free market. When you combine the two together, what I see is when we try to combine those two definitions together and say, all right, what level of freedom do we have and who owns it? When we really parse out what exists, it's a crony capitalist system. You have restrictions on the regular everyday folks, and a lot of these restrictions and these legislation and all this limits and whatnot, they go toward assisting those who already exist in that system, right? Like new players have trouble getting in. existing players get the benefit provided that they have that they're bigger. The bigger players get it. So think of it this way: here in my own town in Jacksonville, it was a couple of years ago, there was this big uproar about Airbnb, and the local city council wanted to regulate it, and and there were all these different ideas on how best to regulate it. Now, at the end of the day, the problem that they were trying to solve was very, very limited, but the rules that they wanted to impose could have, depending on which rules at what time that were being floated around, they could have been disastrous for people. Now, I want you to think about what Airbnb really is. It is a regular, everyday person who says, I have a spare room and I would like to rent that out to somebody so that they could come and stay and we exchange some money. Simple as that. It's no different than me saying, hey, friend, you're coming into town. You want to stay at my house? I got an extra room. I'll let you stay at my house for free. But with the added benefit of now it's somebody that maybe I don't know and I'm doing it for money. Right. And so what they were trying to do was pass legislation to deal with the party goers. We've all heard about the party goers probably. And there were only a few houses in town that they were the problem houses. Now, how does this Airbnb notion fit in with this particular conversation? Well, if you already had a bunch of Airbnbs or if you have a lot of money, then the new rules that they would have put in place wouldn't have been too big of a challenge for you to overcome. They might have been, but they might not have been. Right. So if you separate people, let's just separate people into four groups, right? You have the the lowest quarter, and then you got the two middle quarters, and then you got the top quarter, right? The quartiles of people that are running Airbnbs. And we separate them based on how big their operation is. Well, the people at the top quartile, they're more than likely going to be able to manage with whatever rules get put into place, right? Because they have the capital, they have the money, they have the resources to be able to adapt. But the people at the bottom, they don't. And I think this fits into the conversation that Tucker and Glenn were having, in that the people at the top are really driving what we get, what we see in society. You get the Walmarts that are driving it, right? And it's not that Walmart in itself is a problem. The problem is when there's legislation that gives Walmart the advantage. It makes it harder for somebody else to compete who's not already as big. In the same context, we had the Airbnb where if you were a small, you had maybe you only had your one room in your house, right? And that was all you had to compete with, right? So you would be pushed out of the market because the more legislation, the more rules and regulations that we put into place means the fewer people that can get in there. And the fewer people that are in there means the fewer people that are influencing what those results that they were talking about end up being. So this is why I say it's crony capitalism, because in some cases, it may just be a legislator, a lawmaker who says, "Hey, I've got to do something," and they come up with legislation. And in other cases, it is the big players who are kind of supporting it. And sometimes you'll see this, right? And I don't have an example at the moment, but sometimes you will see there's legislation, and the lawmaker will say, or whoever's supporting it will say, "Well, it's supported by all these big companies." Oh, how convenient is that? How convenient that many of these corporations and companies are supporting legislation that's going to put more regulation and limitations upon them. Why would they support that? Well, I can tell you why. Because it guarantees their survival in the marketplace. And when somebody, oh, look at that. My producer has joined us. Good morning, little buddy. When you have that kind of a system, then yes, you are going to start seeing some bland things, because there's a limited amount of choice, and when there's a limited amount of choice out there, what is there to choose from? How can we say, you know what? I like a dollar store but I don't like that dollar store because it's ugly. That dollar store, why they managed to be a good, awesome dollar store that provides great, cost-effective items, but they also it looks good, right? And think of it this way: Walmart versus Target. Now, a lot of people would agree, not always, but a lot of people would agree, I think, that generally speaking, when you walk into a Target, it looks cleaner than when you walk into a Walmart. The same concept can apply to dollar stores or any other store. Now, the difference is those are big players. They can compete against each other. We need smaller players that can compete against each other. And I believe that when you have that kind of a system, one that doesn't favor existing players or players with more resources, then what you get are better buildings. You get a better society. You get the happier people because people have more options for which they can pursue. Now, I want to get back to the clip. Now, we played that 4-minute clip. There's about let's see, how long is that clip? The next clip, I think the next clip is only like 41 seconds. And this is almost directly after what we just watched. So I think this was this is what was missing on social media. This is what libertarians need to hear and how we move forward with improving things. So let's play that.
Do you see a kind of movement of people trying to explore those issues and how politics can improve that component of American life?
No, I don't. But I do know, and obviously, this is a belief that's consistent with what I do for a living. So in some sense, it's self-justifying. But I sincerely believe that the first step to change is describing what's wrong and then describing what you want instead of what you currently have. And so I do think there are so few people putting this into words that there couldn't be a movement of people who want it because it's inchoate in most people.
Okay. So this is, I think, where libertarians have that opportunity to really be part of the conversation. So he's saying, like, look, there's not a movement because I'm not hearing about it, right? And a lot of libertarians might say, well, no, wait a minute. We've got this guy and that guy and this guy. The fact of the matter is, when you look at people with huge name recognition on the level of Joe Rogan, on the level of Tucker Carlson, and so forth, there aren't libertarians in that level of the conversation. We don't. Now, we have some popular people, don't get me wrong, and they're great people, but what we need is more of them. So let me give you a little story. Years ago, when Gary Johnson was running for the Libertarian Party, don't groan, folks, don't just chill out here. I knew a guy, and he didn't think that Gary Johnson was much of a libertarian. And he said, look, when I first heard Gary Johnson speak, I knew he wasn't a libertarian. Now, I don't really like to make a habit of deciding who is and is not a libertarian. And I could have argued with this guy and said, well, he's a libertarian because of these reasons or that reasons, or I could have agreed with him. But instead, here's what I said to this man. I said, how many of your friends and family would have said the same thing? How many of them, when they first heard him, would have said, wait a minute, that's not libertarianism as I've heard it, right? And this is the point. We need to get out there and have these conversations with people, more conversations, simply in the most simple, basic way, so that when people hear something, when they hear the phrase libertarian economics, it's not libertarians who are saying, wait a minute, what does that even mean? And nothing you're describing sounds like what I think libertarian economics as a phrase might mean, right? Only the libertarians right now are the ones squawking. Our friends who are not libertarians, they're not listening to that and saying, that's not what all my libertarian friends have been saying. Like, that's not what I understand libertarian, economics to mean. And so we need to get our voices out there. We need to create more content. We need, whether that be in the form of blog post or in this particular case, podcast. And we need to speak as simple and as direct about the issues as possible so that the Tucker Carlsons one day can no longer claim that there isn't a movement. There is a movement. It's just so small that it's easy to say there's no movement. That's what we need to be doing. And this is why I encourage libertarians to go to Toastmasters. Like I'm really, really big on the idea of Toastmasters. Why? Because it will help you become a better communicator so that your voice goes toward creating this, this known and this understood network of people talking about these issues so that when somebody says the word libertarian, they don't misunderstand it on what they think it means. They know what it means. They know what we mean when we say things like crony capitalism or just capitalism or free market. These are terms that we have the power to really influence, but we need to get our voices out there and we need to become somebody that people want to hear from. Now, maybe you're not that kind of person. You know, there are some, I know I've got some people that watch the show and they're like, whoa, 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 I ain't starting no podcast. Or, hey, I ain't giving no speeches. Or maybe I'm not even writing. You know, I don't want to communicate at all. That's cool. Everybody has a role. So support those who are putting themselves out there. Make sure you clip their videos and spread them around, right? Talk about them. Invite them as much as you can to come out to your events and speak, because the more that people like me and others get out there and put our content out there, the more that the outside world, if you will hear the movement that does exist. So I don't think there's any reason here to be angry with Tucker Carlson. Not, was he wrong? Yes. Does he need to be corrected? Sure. Why not? We don't have to be angry about it. In fact, I think it's a learning moment. It's a teachable moment for ourselves to look and say, what is it that would lead him to say these kind of things and how do we resolve it? It's that simple. So I hope that makes sense. And I hope that, you know, you think about this and you find your place into helping push that movement. All right, let's see what we got here. We have, so that's all I got to say about that. And I do want to move into a bill review. And I was kind of excited this morning that I actually had two things to talk about, because normally I do what I've kind of been doing is just a bill review. And the problem is I've got like all these little like setup videos and I don't want to play too many of them. And it kind of made me upset, or maybe sad, I guess, because I like my just a bill video clip that I made with my producer here when he was younger. So I'm going to play that now as a lead in to the bill review. So let's go ahead and play my little intro clip. Now, if you've watched the show for a long time, you're probably already familiar with it. But if you're relatively new, this is something I created. I'm going to try to start using it more to introduce the bill review segment of the show.
But I know I'll be a law someday, at least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
All right. So I really enjoy that. I had a lot of fun making it. And I've actually considered, you know what? He's a little bit bigger now. Like that. He was like 2 maybe when I did that video. And so maybe we'll have to do a new one with him, you know, a little bit older now. I don't know. We'll see. You know, he's the producer, so I'll talk to him and see what he says. What do you think? Yeah, he's not ready yet. He's still thinking about it. So we're going to figure this out. So all right. So let's get into this bill review. And I want to pull up on the screen this article that kind of brought it to my attention. And this article is actually old, but it was this was the best of the articles that I could find. So this article actually comes, it looks like in January of this year. And when I went out kind of researching, you know, sometimes there are multiple bills that are in limbo or kind of like working their way through the system. But at any rate, I think this bill, I think this article is going to be the best at highlighting the bill review that I want to discuss. So let's pull that up on the screen here. All right. So it says New York defense lawyers push to defend teens' right to remain silent. So let's go down and we see here, you know, let's see, as the New York legislative session opens this month, and again, this is January, youth justice advocates and progressive Democratic lawmakers are rallying behind a bill that would protect teenage crime suspects from being bullied by police into falsely confessing or incriminating themselves. Known by the hashtag Right to Remain Silent, legislation authored by State Senator Jamal Bailey was heard in the Senate's Committee on Children and Families Tuesday. With a majority in favor of the bill, it is now before the Codes Committee. The way bills work is somebody introduces it, and then it goes through different committees, and they review it, make amendments, that sort of thing. So let's see. Let's go down here and let's see. If signed into law, the courts would enforce Bailey's bill. Judges would suppress the use of teenagers' potentially incriminating statements given to police under circumstances, including the teen did not first consult with an attorney before interrogation. The minor and their parents or guardians, if they were present, were not notified of their Miranda rights, or Miranda rights were not knowingly and voluntarily waived. Now, I think that's huge, right? Like, that's a big deal. Those are protections that adults have. And when it comes to the criminal justice system, they should be extended to minors as well. Why? Because the punishments can be just as severe for minors. They can upend their entire. We're not talking about like, hey, we're going to ask you a bunch of questions and then we're going to let you go home, and then you'll probably be fine. If no big deal. No, they suffer some of the same consequences when these things aren't put into place. When I look at the law, I favor a system that will put every effort forward into ensuring that innocent people are not punished. That is paramount. What is it? Blackstone's law that says better 10 better 10 guilty go free than one innocent go to jail. It's not quite exactly what he said, but it's something along that line. Right? Like, that's the idea behind this, the criminal justice system that we should always strive for. And I'm kind of surprised that there already isn't statute that applies to minors. It's kind of surprising here. All right. So the youth interrogation bill addresses racial inequalities throughout our communities and justice system while ensuring that all youth have the benefit of an attorney present to protect their right to remain silent. The right to remain silent absolutely must remain protected. It's literally, I plead the fifth, right? Like, it's literally, I don't want to incriminate myself. And with all the laws that we have, you could easily do so. Like, because nobody can know I'm 45. I could easily incriminate myself in any number of ways. I can only imagine what a 16-year-old, 17-year-old me would do if they were confronted by the police and, were intimidated, as a 16 or 17-year-old might very well be. All right. Let's see here. Is there any more? Yes, there is one more thing that I want to read here. So, where did it go here? Where did it go? Down here a little bit more. A recent example. So they're going to example. So where did it go here? Is down here. Wow, it's down here a little bit further. The most widely known and devastating of cases based on forced confessions of minors involves the Central Park Five. Anybody remember that? I remember this. In 1989, 5 Black and Latino teenagers, ages 14 to 16 at the time, were interrogated by police for hours without a lawyer following the rape and beating of a woman who had been jogging in the park. The teens were forced into false confessions and served years in prison before another man confessed to being the sole perpetrator. Now, this other man, it was like a decade later, a man, and let's see here, where's I have my notes here. So like a decade later, a man named, Matthias Reyes confessed to the assault and claimed he was the only actor. DNA evidence confirmed his involvement. So this was a decade later. And the convictions of 5 of them, five were vacated in 2002. And then a sixth person was vacated in July of 2022. So this was a 1989 issue. Now, why would I support the bill? Well, we're going to take a look at the bill, but first I want to show a couple of things that I think are of value to be learned here. So I'm gonna pop open this. Let's see where we go. There we go. So let's bring up this right here. So this is a flyer from an organization regarding the right to remain silent. And it says New York State must end police interrogation of children without consultation with a lawyer. Millions of children under 18 come in contact with police every year. Young people often waive their Miranda rights because they do not understand the consequences of the waiver or are coerced by the police or urged by their parents, bad parents. New York's infamous wrongful conviction of the 5 innocent teenagers, the exonerated 5, they once were the Central Park 5, now they're the exonerated 5, serves as a reminder of the dire need to safeguard due process protection and the rights of children. I absolutely agree. Now, where I disagree with this a little bit is that there's this focus on Black and it's Latino children. There's no Latinx. That doesn't even, like, from all my Spanish friends, the X, like that's not, there's no way to even say that from all my Spanish friends. No, I'm not the one saying this, okay? But it's Latino. Black and Latino children are most likely to come in contact with the police due to over surveillance in low socioeconomic schools and communities. That is an entirely separate matter. What I want to focus on is the fact that this bill needs to protect due process for minors in the same way that due process is protected for somebody like myself. I can only imagine what it would feel like to believe my son didn't do something, right? My son said, "Dad, I didn't do it." And to have been convicted because he was not given the same protections of the law as I would be. Now, a little difference. When my son is 16 or 17, he will know not to talk to the police. But many kids don't. Many adults don't. Many people think that they're trying to cooperate with the police. And what they need to do is shut up. No, I'm not going to play that famous clip. There's like several of them, of shutting up, but you've probably seen it. So in this particular context, I support the idea of this bill. Now, I want to point out a couple of more things from this flyer here that I thought were kind of interesting. So it says on the left here, police are allowed to interrogate a child without a parent or guardian present. This is current law, New York law. Police are allowed to lie to coerce a child to waive their Miranda rights. Now, I don't think police should ever be allowed to lie in the pursuit of justice. Different sort. We'll save that for another day. Police are not required to allow a child to meet with their parents before the police read the child their Miranda rights. So in other words, even if the parent knows better, the police are not, they don't have to let the child meet with their parents. So the parents can say, "Shut up, don't talk to the police." Police are not required to explain to the child what they want to question them about. And then police, can't even say it here because of myself. Police do not have to tell the child that they can stop answering questions at any time, right? So these are very critical, I believe. Now, under this right to remain silent law, it would do 3 things: protect the child's right to remain silent by requiring consultation with a lawyer. And I like this word, requiring consultation with the lawyer, to ensure they understand their rights and the consequences of waiving it. In other words, the bill doesn't say you have the right to meet with the lawyer. It would say, as a minor, it is required that you consult with the lawyer before you can waive any rights. 100% agree. After the police take, second point, after the police take a child into custody, if they determine interrogation is necessary, it would be mandatory that the child first consult with the lawyer before any questioning can take place. In other words, we're saying it's mandatory. You absolutely have to make this happen. And then lastly, consultation with the lawyer would be a non-waivable requirement. Completely agree. Any statement taken in violation of this requirement could not be entered into evidence against the child. I completely agree. This is absolutely a good bill. Now, let's take a look at the bill. Well, actually, I want to take a look at something else. So the Central Park 5, that was a big thing. And we have a current president, or a current former president, who's running for office again. And let's take a look at this video clip. I think it's important in the context here, because of law and order. It's important, right? Let's see.
Of course I hate these people. And let's all hate these people, because maybe hate is what we need if we're going to get something done.
Found a female. She was still alive, in fact, still is.
I am strongly in favor of the death penalty. I'm saying if they're found guilty, if the woman died, which she hopefully will not be dying, but if the woman died, I think they should be executed.
All right. Wow. Impressive. Right now, he bills himself as being the law and order president. His words, not mine. Well, part of law and order, Mr. Trump, President Trump, is that when the law is wrong, we rectify it. In this particular case, the law was wrong, and he won't admit that the law got it wrong. Furthermore, he wanted to execute these kids. Now, I get it. Rape and violent crimes, they're detestable. And I can understand people's desire for blood. But our desire for blood cannot be so strong that we allow ourselves to take blood ourselves. I think I said that right. We have to be careful. And I get it. I'm, the death penalty for libertarians is verboten. We don't like it for this very reason. Because what would have happened if these 5 men, young boys at the time, young men, were executed before we found out who the real rapist was? Well, you can't bring them back. Furthermore, if they had proper due process, they wouldn't have went to jail. They wouldn't have lost a decade of their life. They wouldn't have been dragged through a horrendous trial, or they might have been, maybe that might have actually still happened, but they wouldn't have lost a decade of their life. And then furthermore, when they were exonerated, they wouldn't have received a huge settlement. So the taxpayers wouldn't have had to pay a huge settlement for people. Think of all the money that we would save by simply protecting the due process of kids. Now, again, if kids had done something, they should be punished. Should they get the death penalty? Most libertarians, pretty much all libertarians, are going to say no. And that's a conversation for another day. But because we don't disagree with the idea of punishing people. Where we disagree is that the death penalty, there's no coming back from that. You cannot compensate somebody who has been a victim of the death penalty. It's a done deal. And in this particular case, we see that they got exonerated, and the real person had been running loose for a decade, and he was a serial rapist. Now, I don't know whether he raped people between the time that they were convicted and the time that he was convicted. I assume so. But more importantly, this could have all been avoided if we simply treated the legal system, treated individuals as individuals. There are some nuances to be had about teens and about children, minors, compared to adults. And that's why I think in this particular case, when we look at that flyer, let's bring that back up over here. So when we look at this flyer and we say, oh, look at the things that it's claiming that it's going to do. It's going to require consultation with a lawyer. It's going to make it mandatory that a child consult with the lawyer before any questioning. It's going to make it it's going to be a non-waivable requirement that my producer's having a little bit of fun today. It's going to be a non-waivable requirement that any statement in violation of I'm sorry, I've said that all wrong. Consultation with a lawyer is going to be a non-waivable requirement. In other words, they can't say, I don't need to talk to a lawyer. No, you are going to talk to a lawyer. And then they talk to the lawyer, right? And then, and that's going to help them protect their right so that they don't get in prison for 10 years for a crime that they didn't commit, that they don't potentially receive the death penalty or worse, because the death penalty is not the only thing. They could have been stabbed in jail and then killed, right? Like there's any number of horrible outcomes. This bill, let's take a look at it real quick. Because I always like to show the bill at least. This is a big thing for me that we show bills. Let's see here. Where are we? There we go. All right, let's put this on the screen. There we go. Bill. All right. So the parts that I want, I'm not going to read the whole bill. I want to point out, just because the idea of a bill review is that everyday citizens can go and read a bill and decipher for themselves whether or not they agree with it. Now, sometimes it gets tricky. Bills can be long. They can reference other legislation. They can be challenging. Don't get me wrong. This one in particular happens to be 7 pages. It's not 7 pages of changes. What a bill does when there's one in session to be voted on is you'll see that there's some green, and then you'll see that there's some red. And so what a bill will typically do is it will show in green or sometimes in blue, whatever. It'll have some designation for things that are to be added to existing legislation, and then things that are to be removed. And the removal tends to be if it's something that just is no longer a good idea, or if it's inconsistent with what they're adding. That tends to be what's going on. So we look at this here and we see that there's a whole bunch of green and there's some red. And so let's get down. I'm going to skip down to page 3 here, because I'm just going to read, because I want you to see just how easy it is. Let me bring this up here. All right. So this is page 3, lines 14 and 15. And so what it's talking about here, let me scroll back up, and this is also in green up here, section 7. If the officer determines the questioning of the child is necessary prior to taking action authorized by subdivision 4 or 5, and you don't have to worry about subdivision 4 or 5, the officer may take the child to a facility designated by the chief administrator of the courts as a suitable place for the questioning of children, or upon the consent of a parent or other person legally responsible for the care of the child, to the child's residence, and there, subject to the requirements of subdivision 8, question him or her for a reasonable period of time. And then it goes into section 8, and it says, a child shall not be questioned pursuant to this section, the section that's referring to, unless, and then we've got our subpoints A and then B. So read it like this: a child shall not be questioned pursuant to this section unless the child, now we're down here on lines 14 and 15, unless the child has consulted with legal counsel in person, by telephone, or by video conference. This consultation may not be waived. See how simple that was? Like, you could have read it. You didn't necessarily have to have the other portion or the flyer. The flyer makes it easier. It's a little bit more plain English. You don't have references to other statutes. It just kind of tells you what it does or doesn't do, or what it limits, what it restricts, what it adds, so on and so forth. But in this particular case, we can easily read the bill. All right. So let's go down to page 4, line 43. We're going to see again how easy it is. And you can see there's red where they're removing stuff. We're not going to read all through it. There's green to kind of tell you this is what's going to be added. And then the items in black here. So for instance, like this portion here, this is existing statute. So it's 7 pages to show you what changes will be made to the existing statute. So then we go down here, really easy. No statement made to a peace officer or a police officer prior to the commencement of a fact-finding hearing may be admitted into evidence at a fact-finding hearing. So, like, simple, super easy to read. It's not always the case, but in this case it is. No statement made to a peace officer or police officer made prior to the fact-finding hearing can be admitted into evidence. In other words, they are protecting kids who may not know any better, right? Now, they may have known better if they actually committed a crime. They may have known better and more than likely would have if they're 16 or 17, that they shouldn't have done that particular action. But again, we have a system where the idea is innocent until proven guilty. And many adults don't understand the law. It's reasonable to understand, to think about it, that or is reasonable to consider that a child would also not understand it, and probably more so. All right, last item. Page 5, line 22. The juvenile offender or 16 or 17-year-old has okay, let's back up a little bit. So this one up here, let's see. We're going to go up to C. Juvenile offender or 16 or 17-year-old shall not be questioned pursuant to this section unless or until the juvenile offender or 16 or 17-year-old has consulted with an attorney in person, by telephone, or by video conference. This consultation may not be waived. So this is a different portion. So they're kind of reiterating what we just read elsewhere in a different portion of the statute, because sometimes statutes have, like different elements, and you need to kind of reiterate something, so that it applies here and it applies here as well. So that's what we're reading. So I do these bill reviews not because I like reading bills. Reading bills can be dry and boring. I do these bill reviews so that you understand just how easy it is to read at least a lot of bills. Maybe not all of them. The omnibus bills that are 1,000 pages, yeah, that's going to take a little bit more time. You're going to have to pour yourself, make yourself a pot of coffee, maybe a couple of pots, right? But for many of these bills at the state and local level, you, the average citizen, can and should read them. And if you don't understand them, then you should seek to find out. I mentioned a moment ago Airbnb here in Jacksonville. I read the language. And when I went to the town hall meetings and I would argue and I would say, I would either have questions or I would dispute something, right? And I would point it out. And it went toward these bills not getting passed, because I was one of many in the sea of voices opposing this bill. But you can't just oppose a bill just because it's a bill. You have to oppose it or support it because of what it says. That may be something that you want or don't want. In this particular case, now, if I lived in New York and I were going to advocate for this bill very specifically, I may read it a little bit more carefully, and there may be some elements where I don't like, and there may be some elements that I really do like. I didn't get into that level of detail here. I just wanted to show you that the overall premise of protecting due process for those that are under the age of 18 is as important as protecting due process for those who are 18 and older. And the fact is that younger people can be duped more easily than older people who get duped all the time. So that's all I was doing here. And then the bill review portion of my podcast is literally just to show you that it's not that hard, folks. And this is how you make a better society. So let me tie in this bill review with talking about Tucker Carlson and with the quote that I led into. So the quote and I'm going to bring that up again one more time. Let's bring that quote up here. All right. A major source of objection to a free economy is precisely that. It gives people what they want instead of what a particular group thinks they ought to want. Underlying most arguments against the free market is a lack of belief in freedom itself. We cannot protect freedom, folks. We cannot protect it if we don't understand the bills that our legislators are trying to pass. The reason that we have a crony capitalist society right now, the reason we do not have a proper free market capitalist society is because of all sorts of legislation that has been passed that we, the people, did not read and did not go and complain about and say, hey, wait a minute. No, that bill is a bad bill. Or in this particular case, this bill is a good bill. We want this. The way that we create a society that is beautiful, metaphorically or in reality, is by participating in it, by being involved in it. And for us libertarians, not just by being involved, but being involved in a simple manner, in a way that's easily understood to the people around us. We need to make sure that if there's jargon, we explain it simply. If there's not jargon, if there's just a complex idea, we break it down simply so that we can communicate and convince our fellow man and women uh, to support it along with us. This is how we make a better society. You don't like the dollar store because it's ugly? Then help create a free market that allows and makes it easier for a competitor to come in and say, you know what? Here's my building. And by the way, here's some dollar items, right? It's that simple, folks. You want a society that protects the rights of all individuals, regardless of their age or their demographic, whether they're Black or Latino or 16 or 45, then participate. Yes. We're almost done, buddy. My producers tell me that the show is over. I better get going. If you want that kind of society, start participating. Start reading some of these bills. You don't have to read them all. Pick one. Go. Here's what I do. I have a Google alert set up for words like state bill, legislation, lawmaker, stuff like that. And it sends it to my email. And I just kind of scan through the headlines and I pick one that I find interesting. I don't read them all. That's crazy. I don't have that kind of time. My producer wouldn't allow me to have that kind of time. So I just go out and I pick something interesting and I read through it. And if it's something that I need to go and argue about, then I go down to city council or wherever's appropriate, and I argue against it. I make podcasts about it. You can do the same thing. This is how we make a better society. All right. I need to close this show up. My producer's, he's hungry. He's tired of waiting on me. So let's go ahead and close this show out, folks, so that we can get to the important things of life. All right. I want to thank you for watching. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me every Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. And then again, Sundays at 7 p.m. with my co-host, Susan Hogarth, to discuss the LP happenings. We look across the vastness of tyranny in this United States, and we find out what it is that's happening in the Libertarian Party across the U.S., and we bring that information to you so that you can be inspired and excited. Make sure that you are subscribed. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel or my Rumble channel. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. Make sure that you subscribe to my channels so that you can see when the episodes come out. And then also, do me a favor. Drop a comment at any time. I read them. Let me know how I'm doing by leaving a comment. Is something too dry? Did I use too many references? Whatever. I don't know. Tell me. Let me know. Because I want you to tune in and I want you to feel like that I have not wasted your time, that I've given you the max that I can give you. Lastly, folks, remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. See you tomorrow.